Hello everyone, welcome to DRAF Broadcasts. I'm Ned McConnell and I'm the curator at DRAF, as some of you probably already know. Today we have two speakers actually, so I'm not going to be so involved in the conversation. The first is Zadie Xa, who's an artist, a Korean-Canadian artist. She works with film and performance and textiles and painting. I'm not going to say too much about her because that's the kind of subject of the conversation really. And talking to her is Amy Budd, who is a curator and writer. She's currently curator of projects and exhibitions at Modern Art Oxford. She is previously the associate curator at Art Night in 2019, where she worked with Zadie Xa. And prior to that, she was exhibitions organizer and deputy director at Raven Row. So some of you might already know, but I'm just going to run through a bit of information about what this is and what the series is and the format of the talk. So this series was set up in partnership with Performance Exchange in order to try and support Performance Exchange is an organization that is trying to create kind of cross-sector dialogue around the collecting and presenting of performance work, and that's run by Rose Lejeune. So as always, these talks are being archived on our shared YouTube channel. You can find out information about that through our websites. These are regular sessions, so we're trying to stick to Thursdays. And the next one for Performance Exchange will be on the 11th of June, and that will be with Towner Gallery, Grundy and De Montfort University. So that one sounds really exciting. So the format of this talk is that I'll hand over to Amy and Zadie, and they're going to talk for maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, something like that, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. And the way you ask your questions is that somewhere on your screen, or at the bottom for most people, there's a little Q&A button, and you can just type in your questions there, and then at the end we'll try and get through as many as we can. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Amy, who's going to speak to Zadie about her practice. Over to you, Amy.
Great, thank you, Ned. So yeah, it's a real privilege to speak to Zadie about her live work. As Ned said, I was lucky enough to be an associate curator of Art Night last year with Helen Nesbitt, and we, with other curators as well, subsequently produced this enormous durational performance for Walthamstow Library, which probably happened this time last year and took about 6 months to bring together. And during that process, what started off as a one-off durational performance turned into this huge itinerant solo exhibition that went to Yarra, Delaware Pavilion and Tramway. And there's so much to say about Zadie's practice in general. She has a background in painting, but in recent years has begun filtering her approach to painting through performance, video, sound, textile, costume, and uses a wide vocabulary that draws from pop culture, fashion, science fiction, and ancient religions to create these very spectacular and immersive performances that really test the medium of itself. I think it's lucky to have this live series, because I think a lot of conversations really focus on Zadie's objects and her making, the kind of sculptural practice, but it's good to focus, I think, on the approaches to staging a live work as a very ephemeral, durational piece of work, which I think, for Zadie's previously described, it allows you to work with hybridity and reworking. And so that we really wanted to kind of explore those themes today. To start with, performance artist is maybe a label that, Zadie, you wouldn't necessarily give yourself as an artist, and it's something that's been given to you given the body of work you've made over recent years. And you've previously described yourself, at least to me, more of an editor in your role as a performance artist. And with that in mind, I'm thinking about how you bring your very many different references together within your live work and the sculptures and installations as well. But I wondered if you could start by saying more about your approach to bringing the live works together, the performance pieces, and how you use collage as a strategy to kind of stage these works.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming. Do you think that we could just have the slides just kind of roll out for this as while I'm speaking? I'll just keep talking anyways. So, I think you mentioned that it was nice to be able to speak about the performance practice. Sorry, about the performance of practice and how that comes about. But, even though when I'm working within that space, I'm still largely thinking about objects and thinking about how I construct those things. And, it's through the foundation of my learned education in painting, which I still apply to all aspects of my work, but within the live work. So generally, before the performance even starts, so these are two different exhibition shots that I have, but I generally think about what the composition of what the actual world that we'll kind of create together will look like. And so this is really important because obviously with performance art in galleries, or let's say outside like I did in Serpentine or at Venice, you have to encounter a lot of different objects and obstacles. So similarly, the way you would in an exhibition space, you need to think about how you choreograph that just to keep people safe, and what movements might make sense. And I'm a real, I guess I'm a big fan of having people move in and around the space as opposed to having this kind of two-way experience between a set audience and then a stage set, which I have done before and I do like, but I think for performance art in galleries, I much prefer having it a bit more of an immersive field. So in relation to kind of stitching together reference material, I have always had a real strong interest in painting. When I say that, I don't mean like oil on canvas. I mean more like color and texture and shape being lined side by side. And one of the things I started to do about 5-6 years ago was started to make garments. Can you go back to the other slide, please? The first one? Second one, rather, sorry. And the reason why is because I basically was thinking about a way in which you can make a painting move. So how do you make a painting move without, walking around the canvas? So basically, trying to create these garments that would fit on top of a body or a shape, and have them move in space, and think about how that might work compositionally. And so one of the things I've been thinking about at the same time was, I guess, archetypal figures that I thought were interesting. And one of them was the Korean shaman or Korean shamanism. And so one of the things I was really drawn to outside of kind of my own interest in spiritual practices, or, the kind of socio-political aspects of why, it's important to my practice, was more the actual kind of ritualistic and, I guess, performative body within those spaces. And one of the things I was really interested in were the actual garments that they would wear. So when Korean shamans, if you go to the third slide, please, fourth, yeah, next one. So this is a Korean shaman in her space. And I like this photo because I like this kind of, I guess it's like a ritualistic space, but it's also kind of, what I would say like decorated or ornamented with different things that, whatever, help propel the performance. But if you also look at this coat that she's wearing, so thinking about the ways in which I could also create kind of, I guess, like fantastical capes or jackets for the characters that I'd be working with. So one, to try to build up that character, who that character is, and also to be able to give the performer that's inhabiting that character the actual kind of agency, or maybe agency isn't the right word, but I guess the character layering of who that person is. When you put a jacket on, you put some clothes on, you behave and move differently. And so one of the things I was thinking a lot about were these Korean shamans. And if you go to the next slide, if you look at the image, in the background, you'll see all these different jackets laid aside. So basically, this shaman, if and when a spirit or an ancestor passes through her body, what she'll do is she'll change her clothes, because depending on who she's channeling, this is the person that, or the spirit or the deity that you'd also be wearing on your body. So for example, if she was to entertain one of the war gods, she would wear like kind of militaristic suits, and there's a dance where she dances with knives. So I like that idea of constantly shape-shifting or changing form.
And the shamans, I was going to say the shamans are always women, which I didn't realize until you pointed it out. In Korean culture, shaman figures tend to be
yeah, that's right. So it is majority female-led cultural religion, but there are also men shamans called paksu as well. and another thing, just as a sidebar, I think it's a really interesting space because shamans have historically been looked down upon as kind of lower rungs of a working society. It's actually quite like a taboo kind of a job to do. Because of this kind of transgressive space, my understanding is that a lot of male shamans who might be more feminine or identify as femme are able to actually perform that, perform who they are within those spaces that are kind of, raising eyebrows in a society which is actually really conservative and really, really rigid in terms of what their gender norms are. So if you go to the next slide, one of the things I was thinking about also with these ideas of jackets, and this is, thinking about it from 5 years ago, was thinking about kind of performers within the music sphere that I always really looked up to as a kid, and really thinking about the kind of power suits that people would wear in order to perform. That also, comes down through just like looking at musicians that you might idolize and copying them as a teenager. But I really like the idea of kind of patchworking and kind of identifying different logos or maybe bands or whatever fashion labels that person would identify with, because in some ways I suppose that also gives the wearer kind of agency or power. Like they feel more powerful when they feel more cool, or they feel like the person they want to be when they're wearing that thing. So I was
going to ask, when you're starting developing performance, then do you start with the objects? You're thinking about the clothes, the kind of the capes. I remember you said you like using capes because bodies can move easily within them. And these are kind of versatile objects that are connected to Korean history, but that's the starting point, is the material of a performance, and then the choreography builds out from that.
Yes, thank you for keeping my thoughts going with certain structures. That's definitely what I was trying to get to. You're absolutely right. And I think the reason why I do that is just because I am really object-based. So, another reason why I thought about a cape, outside of just kind of the ideas of, being able to transform from like a, character to character, be able to conceal their body or shapeshift underneath that, like I always talk about this, Clark Kent, he looks the same, he wears a cape, he becomes Superman, looks exactly the same, no glasses, just a cape. But all of a sudden everyone is like, this person is totally different, we don't know who he is. Or in Harry Potter, with the invisible cloak, this is something that he's able to, move, from space to space undetected and kind of, fight evil. But also because a cape, if you think about it, when it's spread out onto a wall, it's very similar to a painting. So, because I had been kind of working within a two-dimensional field for so many years, even having that as like the main thing I wanted to do when I was really young, for me, it was a leap to kind of go into a more three-dimensional space. So that was an easy way for me to kind of think, right, how can I work this way but still understand the surface of what this looks like? And so if we can just flip through the next few slides just slowly. So these are just examples, or maybe slower.
These are yours, so we should look at these. These are the ones you've made. So this is your riffing off these existing shamanistic cloaks, and this is your collage, I guess.
Kind of like my own versions of them. And if we go to the previous image, you'll see these are older photos of me wearing all these kind of different garments. But it's, again, when I'm thinking about live performance, this is initially how it all started. I think in a lot of these images, I maybe only had done one performance, which is at the Serpentine, and even some of the other garments in this image predate, me even having thought of even doing a performance. I think the first three at the top, or maybe actually all of them except for the one where my arms are out, they were all made before I had even done a live performance. And I think that was the big thing for me, and it still is the idea of like wanting to build a character and tell stories in that way.
Should we think
sorry, go ahead.
Just about the world, so you extend thinking about Art Night and how there were a whole set of costumes or garments in that, and then objects, the orcas as well, and just thinking more broadly about the world building or the origin myths and the stories, and how you scale up a performance, I suppose, based on the objects within it. And I guess I'm trying to think about the whole visual language you create for these events, and how all these objects speak to each other, but you also have this liveness in mind as well, I suppose.
And so can you just repeat the question again? I heard what you said.
Just in terms of how the garments you know, facilitate the performance alongside the masks and the orcas and any other props or instruments as well, and how you are building, you describe this as world building for the installations, but also the processions as well have an element of creating an environment, which for me at least speaks of collage. It's a collage approach.
Yeah, of course. And I think, you know, if you look at the garments, you can see there's collage bits in there. The way I think about, let's say, sound or music is also, you know, taking from disparate kind of source material and stitching everything together. It's kind of the way I think most people can think about hybrid identities. It's a kind of a very tactile, simple way of thinking about, you know, I am a person that was born here and lives here, and I like this stuff, and I'm culturally attached to this, and, you know, you're kind of a hybrid, a mix of all these things. But within the performances as well, I also just like to think about these elements as formal things. They're being worn on top of all these bodies that are moving through space. And for me, it's very much like working with a painting. If you're thinking about composition, and you're thinking about, oh, I think, you know, it's just sometimes really dumb. Like, oh, I think that this pink shape, you know, worn by, let's say, you know, Mary, the performer, would look really, really great as, you know, as it's jutting along this background that's yellow, for example, right? And how that interface functions together. And I think usually that's the way I think about it. So of course there is a storyline, and there's a kind of concept of the overall message that I'm trying to do with the work. But equally important is really thinking about how color and shape are going to work together, and, you know, the kind of interesting frictions that we'll have also when you're working within, as you said, like a created immersive environment within a gallery or like a theatrical setting. But equally so, you know, it's really important to think about those things, and that kind of friction that you may encounter, you have no control over when you're working outside. Let's say, you know, with the Venice Biennial just last year, or the Serpentine years ago. I mean, that's something that I thought was really interesting. It's a way in which an artist is able to see their work kind of function and behave and react to the real world. And that for me was really exciting.
Maybe that's a nice moment to think about the audience, I guess, and like how the audience, or to what extent are you considering the audience when you're planning or staging a live work, and also creating these costumes and textiles?
So, I mean, one of the things that I think about when I'm thinking about audience is staging, and also where the audience is going to sit. So are we able to have the next photos from the B folder? Yeah, so I wanted to show these examples. Are you able to see the entire screen, or is it just those folks there in the corner staring? Okay, anyways, yeah, thinking about, again, so these are specific examples. So, you know, this is recent performance I did last year with 5 amazing performers, and, you know, we needed to think about where everyone's bodies could be, and if we wanted it to be a static performance or not. And actually this performance is based on the 2016 performance I did at the Serpentine, which it was really, that was my first performance, and it was really important for me to think, like, how can I make sure that the performers that I'm working with, who are wearing what may appear to look like ethnographic or anthropological kind of regalia, how do I not create a space where they become kind of like the hired entertainment, or like, you know, just some, I guess, yes, kind of, I guess, like an orientalistic kind of perspective, is like exotic performers performing, especially in front of kind of this, like, you know, very privileged institution, right? And also, you know, in that park, and, you know, that to me was a really big concern, because the stakes are really high. I want people to feel comfortable, and obviously that's not what, you know, anyways. So one of the things I thought about was, you know, how can I make sure that we have that power, and it's not held where we're in the center of the stage? And so, you know, the way my performance worked is we basically created like 5 different coordinate points around the Serpentine Pavilion that year. And so basically we would force the crowd to move with us if they still wanted to participate and kind of move along with the performance. And if you go to the next slide, we did the same thing in Venice as well. So here they are, they're coming out of Giardini or whatever, and they're walking in and around the crowd. Obviously, this is also really interesting because, you know, some people, I mean, they don't care. They're not here to see you. They're there to, you know, go on with their day. So if they, I think I like that idea that they're able to encounter a performance as well. And then you need to, as a performer, be able to either, you know, dictate that the audience needs to get out of your way, right? Without telling them, can you please move, sir? You know, you need to, you know, use a certain energy when you don't speak, and you get them out of the way. And also the kind of idea that you would encourage them to participate and watch and hopefully follow along with the procession. So this is very much the way the serpentine worked as well. And we can go down the next few slides just slowly, just to show.
I also think there's a certain, like, well, there's an economic factor within it, because you're not, you know, you're keeping it light, you're keeping it kind of responsive. You're not asking for like a mass staging. It's kind of very personal, intimate, and adaptable. So there's a certain responsiveness to these processions, I think, as well.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I guess another reason why I think it's really important to keep things quite simple within these spaces is there's a level of unknown there. Like, you have no idea how people are going to react. You know, if you're going to piss people off. I mean, with Venice, it was really stressful because obviously, you know, the real estate for attention is like this. Like, no one really cares about me, you know, or like what we're coming through. So you also kind of worry that you're going to bother other pavilions, you're going to bother other artists. You know, you want to make sure that you're also considerate of so many different factors, considerate of people's spaces that are waiting to do the thing they actually want to do, like go to see like War Provost's Pavilion or something. So I think that that element of keeping it really flexible is important, because you don't, you know, if an obstacle should arise or something unexpected, we're able to really easily mitigate that and move around it without it kind of ruining the performance. Whereas when one works with something that's much more staged and rehearsed, sometimes when certain things happen, it can really throw you off because you're thinking about a certain set of sequences to follow all the time. And so keeping it open, you know, is really important. And, you know, one of the things that I think, you know, that even led me to thinking about this type of performance was the traditional Korean mask drama, which is called talchum. And obviously there's like a lot of different varieties of that depending, you know, regionally where they're being staged. But in the past, I think that I was really most attracted to, maybe if we can go down to, down a few slides, just to go to slide J. There we go. So basically, one of the things I really was attracted about it is because traditionally it wasn't performed by professional actors. And so basically, you know, one time when they were going to celebrate or, you know, hold this ritual in order to hopefully, you know, entice, you know, good rainfall for the harvest, let's say, they basically clear out an empty space in the town and get just, you know, local townspeople to dress up and satirize, you know, local characters or characters in the village, or make fun of like upperclassmen, or, you know, poke fun at like human folly. Anyways, the point being is that there was an interactive space, like a call and response reaction between the audience and the performance. So, you know, the performance really can't happen if there's not an audience, and the audience is not passive, they are also active. They also know when they're supposed to behave. I mean, this is very cheesy, but you know, the kind of really easy example I can think of is like whatever, like at some concert, if Celine Dion is like, everyone raise your lighters, or she, you know, she doesn't even say it and she does it and everyone does it, because like everyone knows like this is the lighter moment, like this is the moment where we're all going to do this thing together.
I was thinking of pantomime, but maybe that's very British, but this kind of call and response.
Right.
Where everyone knows their part to play in this event.
But that's exactly it. And I think that's what makes a lot of traditional Korean performance really exciting for me, because the audience is not passive. They're there to eagerly participate in what's going on. And oftentimes they already know what the performance is going to be, because they themselves are active characters. And so the reason why I wanted that, you know, first off, this was the kind of first entry point into performance with the Serpentine, was because like I was in the performance. I'm not a performer, like I don't dance. Like if we go back up to the first slides again, if you go to, let's say, slide D and E, so there's me in the back with the drum, like no idea what I'm doing. This is before I met Jihye, who I work with now, Jihye Kim, who's like, you know, the upper echelon sort of like percussionist excellence. So this was me when the budget was smaller, and luckily SOAS lent us this drum, and I'm just like beating away with no rhythm. But anyways, it worked.
I remember you saying you can tell which one's you because your glasses are on the outside of the
yeah, I have a good photo of that after we can laugh at that. But you know, the idea that, you know, these people that were in this performance, they're all artists, and they're all like friends of mine, a couple of them, you know, I went to Royal College with. And then, you know, one was like a real dancer who I worked with at the Barbican, and she was amazing. And I've worked with her, you know, on different projects, Jane Chan. And then another, you know, performance artist, Jin Kim, who really lent their kind of expertise. But, you know, none of them had been like, I think with the exception of Jane, none of them were like real performers or doing that all the time, you know. And I just, first of all, they were helping me because they're my friends. Second of all, I'm like, you guys were all born in Korea. Like, please help me. Like, give me some, like, you know, give me some insider tips. We're doing this together.
Just think about the audience for more. Can we look at the art night photos? Because this is just anecdotal really, but one thing on art night we were surprised at, where people were lying on the floor, and we hadn't imagined, we didn't quite expect that to happen for the performance. I remember it came to the night and maybe we'd considered the installation, and it's a very immersive environment. And I was thinking maybe because it was carpet on the floor, but audience members came in and they would just lie down. And then the dancers were like, we're going to have to step over bodies, like, because everyone's so relaxed, no one's moving. And so that was an interesting, yeah, like not quite, well, lacking foresight maybe of how an audience would behave in that space. It was very different to what I imagined.
But which is also a nice surprise, but also I guess because I've done a few things like this before, I kind of feel like usually people, you know, they do end up staying, whatever. I mean, who knows why? They could be bored, or they could be like, this is comfortable, whatever, I'm not going outside training, you know. But luckily, people do tend to move. I think that just is a kind of testament to how amazing the performers are, that they're, you know, they're able to really capture people's attention or like imagination or whatever.
I wonder whether we could say just a little bit more about your role in the performance, in the event when you're not a performing body, when it's happening. Because I had quite a very different experience of working with an artist who wasn't a performing body, and you were very much stage managing or being what you describe as an art director for these works, really. Could you say more about that and how you see your role for these live works particularly?
What in live works that I'm not in. Yeah, I think, you know, it's really, really different. I feel like I'm able to do a way better job at making like the art part like come through, hopefully, just because I have more time, right? Like if you're actually in the performance, it's incredibly draining to be in a performance. It's incredibly draining to give a lecture in front of university students. It's the same thing, right? So, and on top of it, they're wearing costumes and masks and having to think about the way they need to move their bodies. And when I've had to do that, I think I'm really, you're not all there all the time to think about all the other logistics. And so for me, I really enjoy kind of directing people who also are like professional, like, you know, the dancers that I worked with for Art Night in Venice, they're actually, you know, they're professional performers. So working with people who are, you know, artists themselves and incredibly skilled and that bring their, you know, vast knowledge to things is really exciting. And so for me, it is just a matter of kind of, yeah, directing everything and orchestrating how things should go. And, you know, obviously asking for input when necessary, because, you know, it is a collective effort.
That very easily leads to my next question around collaboration, because you're a serial collaborator in your work.
The costumes and the garments that people are wearing and the overall environment that we're trying to create. And I think that, sorry, my connection was unstable.
That's okay. I just asking a question about collaboration, because you do involve so many different artists in these works. And could you say more about how you approach collaboration, how your idea of authorship is maybe changes in the live works compared to sculptures or the installations that you make?
Yeah. I mean, you know, the collaboration is it's the kind of most fundamental thing within these kind of larger scale performances. I'm not a choreographer, I'm not a dancer, I don't have a dance background. And so I'm thinking just specifically about the performances that we have just done. I needed that expertise in order to make something, I guess, on a larger scale than I had ever done before. Sorry, what was the exact question, so I don't go off on a tangent? I can
only just how do you see the other performers in your collaboration? Yeah, and I guess in terms of, I mean, what's interesting, I think, with Art Night was when we cast the dancers together, and you had a very particular idea of what you were looking for as well. You actively seek to involve people who have skills which you don't have, and Jihei particularly, you repeatedly work with key artists in an ongoing basis as well. So these are long-term relationships that you build and unfold them into your practice.
Yeah, I mean, you know, first and foremost, it's a working relationship, right? Like, you know, you're looking, as you said, for a certain skill or expertise. But for me, it's also really about working with people that are nice, that can take direction, but are also, you know, in themselves creative and artistic, because I do ask a lot of them. Like, I don't just tell them like, do this and move your arm like this and walk down this way. You know, we're talking about the conceptual kind of seeds of the work and how we're able to make those things come to fruition. And I think that's been really interesting for me is the necessity to communicate a lot of these ideas in a way that, you know, previously I didn't know how to do, and I'm still learning, which is, you know, what they would call dance language. Because sometimes I would explain something and they'd be like, oh, but I really don't understand. I'm like, oh, what do you mean you don't understand? It's like very clear. But, you know, within the kind of realm of how they think about dance and how you would compose and create something through movement is very different. And that's something that I've had to learn how to work with. And I really enjoy, because whilst we're in rehearsal, I'm learning a lot too. And, you know, one of the things that I think is really interesting, collapsing the idea of like, you know, studio practice, when you're making work in the studio, working in collaboration and working with performance, you're making all the work in rehearsal, but you actually don't know what the work is going to look like until like the moment you're actually doing it, which is a really vulnerable place to be. And I wonder if it's scary for them as well. I'm always really nervous before the performances. Sometimes they're not. They're like, whatever. And it's me in the corner, like really like, you know, whatever, holding on. But that's something that I've actually thought was really interesting with performance, is that you don't actually know what the work is going to look like until it's happened. You don't even know really what it is until after it's done and you have time to think about it. And not to say that doing an exhibition is much different, but it is different in the sense that I feel like the stakes are much lower, right? So if I've created like whatever, 10 paintings, and I have time in private to edit all those things, and when I put them in a gallery space, you just hang them. You have the opening. They might suck. They might not do what you think that you wanted them to do, but there's no surprises unless the painting like literally falls off the wall. There's nothing. You just go and it is what it is. You know what it is. Even if in your head you're like, this is great, or this maybe could have been better, whatever, you know what it's going to be. You can rehearse things and think they're going to be really great, and then they happen. You're like, that maybe there's some things we got to work on, or, you know, this happened, it was unexpected, but actually it made the thing so much more amazing. You know, I think that kind of energy in the space when you're working with live work is really exciting, and it's actually really scary too. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why I keep coming back to it, because it's giving you kind of, I don't know, this sounds like a thrill. That sounds really cheesy, but there's something really exciting about it and really new all the time that you have to adapt to. And then also, whilst you're in that mode, I mean, for me, I'm like, never doing performance again. Like, this is so stressful. But it's like the combination of both.
I wonder whether we could talk a bit more materially about the objects that you use in performance, specifically the masks, which are a kind of a recurring motif, the masks that you use in your performance. Now, for me at least, they have a really interesting function where they allow you to kind of collapse all these references into a single object. They're both tools, performance tools, but they often remain in situ in the space. They're a sculpture as well. So I have in mind, you talked before about going to Harry Potter world, and this object is made for life. It's made for real. It's not just to be seen from a distance. You make it as if it's like this total object in itself. So could you say more about the masks and how you have developed them?
Yeah, sure. Are we able to pull up the photos from the folder E if possible? So maybe we can go to the folder, photo D of the, so maybe just before this one actually. So this is one of my favorite rappers, like musician, MF Doom, and he always wears a mask when he's performing. And one of the things, I mean, as a kid, so basically he's just one of my favorite musicians. And I think when I started using masks, they were initially to reference the Korean mask drama, which I did with Serpentine. And, you know, really we did that obviously as a nod to where that kind of tradition actually came from. But for me, it also became really important in some way as like a defense mechanism to kind of put that on my face when I would be doing performances or performative readings, because it was a way for me to feel like I could really transform and kind of, I guess, like gain the courage to do whatever I needed to do in front of an audience. But again, thinking about the idea of alter egos and the idea of cloaking and caping or wearing a power suit in order for you to feel really transformative, I really feel like masks are the same way. And the reason why I bring up MF Doom is because this is something that he does in his own practice, where, first of all, you know, one of the reasons why he wears a mask is the idea that the most important thing within his practice is the actual music. You know, he's not actually here to be consumed. His image, let's say, is not the thing that he wants people to buy into, right? This is that, I guess, that idea that I was really attracted to. But also the idea that, you know, some of the masks he wears are different, and he also uses a lot of different aliases within his work, depending on what project he's working on. He takes on different pseudonyms. And if we go to the next slide here, so you can see just an example of whatever, him wearing this thing, but whatever, it's always the same. It's a reference of like the Marvel villain Dr. Doom or like a gladiator mask. But the idea that this is the thing that's empowering him to be able to do, you know, to behave the way he needs to in the performances. And that's something that I also, again, wanted to create for myself. So the idea of, you know, taking archetypal figures that I admired, like, you know, Korean shamans, or, you know, certain musicians or hip hop artists that I really, you know, idolized when I was like, you know, a really young teenager, thinking about the way in which they would need to empower themselves before going on stage to perform, right? So this is the same thing that I would, you know, felt like I would need to do in order to perform in front of an audience and to kind of create the costumes to go with that. So if we go up again to slide, we can go through slides A through B just slowly. So, you know, all these masks are actually made by Benito, who I work with, and I've been working with him like on all these performances for the past 4 years. And usually the way we come up with these things is, again, I'll do a drawing again, but it's also really about character building. The idea, you know, for example, for art night, or actually with a lot of the characters that I think about, thinking about kind of like an older woman figure, kind of an elderly, I guess, like, you know, in fairy tales, a crone figure, and thinking about kind of, yeah, I guess, like, for me, I think that's my alter ego, is that, you know, elderly, really powerful woman is the way I would envision myself to be if I had all that power.
Maybe that's a nice moment to talk about, I guess, the emotional aspects of the performances. And you have this fantastic cast of female performers of different ages as well. For Art Night, 2 of the performers were slightly older than the others, and that was intentional, trying to have this kind of wider generation, but also playing up or challenging, I guess, expectations around female behavior through performance. And the masks are quite grotesque, I guess, and that is also emphasized in the movement as well. But I guess that also relates to not wanting the performances to be so easily consumed. These bodies aren't for a passive audience. They're kind of confronting people's expectations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely the thing that it all stemmed for me, is like, you know, I don't want, it's not like I'm trying to aggress the audience or be like really hostile. Like, you know, I'm happy that they're there, when I'm like very thankful, you know, it's not the room. But the idea that, yeah, you know, the performance shouldn't be so consumable or edible. And I think that's something that, gosh, I'm really paranoid about all the time, you know, like, I'm also feeling really responsible that I need to be the custodian of these performers also. They're giving so much, you know, not only their craft, their creativity, they're giving me their time, they're giving me their physicality. You know, these performances are very exhausting. I mean, the Art Night performance was, I think, I don't know, like 7 hours, where they just, you know, it was just, you know, needing to have a really high level of inertia throughout the whole thing. But again, right, it is really important that the masks and the idea that I'm not trying to present like kind of Western canons of like beauty within the performance. It's not kind of what I want to do, not because I'm not myself attracted to that, but maybe the fact that in normal life I am attracted to that. And so it's important to kind of, you know, go out there, and I don't know, I like the idea of kind of just being a creature. I think it's really interesting, where it's like it's outside of thinking about, I guess, like humans, just thinking, I don't know.
Maybe we could watch a video of you, Vino, for Art Night. We haven't seen any. I'm conscious we haven't watched any yet, actually. So if that's possible, quickly.
Yeah, I think So this is going to be a video with, it's a short clip with all 4 of the performers. Jihei's on the side playing the music. So that was at 3 a.m., right?
So that's the climax. That was like this apex of the whole performance. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's intense. I mean, yeah, I guess I'm interested in the architecture of the performances as well. And you build in these moments of intensity, of real inhibition in the performers against things that are more gestural and responsive to an audience as well. Yeah.
So what was the question?
It wasn't really a question. It was just
Okay.
my observation. But how are we doing with the time, Ned? Maybe we should, if there's any questions, or I've got one last question.
Yeah, Amy, do you want to go on with your question? And I've got one, and then we can
Okay.
see what you've got.
My final question really was, it sounds really not related to performance, but for me it is. I just want you to talk about your studio as a site for making live work, really. It's something that I've noticed is mentioned a lot in interviews with you. All journalists really love saying, I was in a studio and, you know, all these great amazing objects are there. And I think out of all the artists, well, many artists I've worked with, you have an incredibly rigorous studio practice. You are there pretty much all the time in a very real sense. And I wondered if you could talk about how you translate these live works, these incredible worlds that you build from your studio to gallery venues, to like public art venues. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's from your painting training, is that you're used to this ritual yourself of going to a studio to conceive these works. Rather than a dance space or a rehearsal space, you use your studio as a site for making.
Yeah. Maybe we can just pull up the last G folder, and then you can just flip through the images just so that we don't have to look at like big head on the thing. So this is these photos are, I think, this photo is from a few years ago, but I just put it because I don't have very many pictures of my studio. But yeah, I guess I think of my studio as kind of like a cauldron of like, you know, where all these different ingredients go and I can really experiment. And it's really a really physical practice too, because you know, I'm having to you know, dye, bleach, and paint all these things and sew everything together, and also, you know, coordinating how a lot of the sculptures or the masks are going to have to be designed and constructed with Benito, who has his own studio downstairs. We used to share a studio, but now I have my own studio upstairs. And this is from like a couple weeks ago. I'm at home dyeing fabric in my bathtub. But Yeah, I think for me, I guess it's a space where I'm able to be the performer, right? Like I'm constantly thinking about these things when I'm sewing the works together. Like I'm not, you know, sometimes I go into kind of more like, you know, comatose states where it's very manual and I'm not really thinking, but in some ways it's quite meditative to kind of just really go into the zone and just get things done and you're not having to think. And other times when I'm making the work, I try to do this thing where I'm actively thinking about how, I guess like what lineage I want to connect myself to through art making. You know, a lot of the fabric work, whilst it doesn't look like it's referencing traditional Korean textile, like patchwork, it is something that I think about. It's something that it's something that I'm always trying to channel within the actual making of the garments. And I don't know, I guess I feel like, again, this sounds very corny, but when you're in the studio alone all the time, you got to think about things to, you know, keep up the entertainment. But I do genuinely think about ways in which you can kind of like, you know, weave a little bit of magic or like cast some spells within the work so that, you know, when these things are finished, like even I look at them and I hold them up and they feel like they have a lot of weight to them. And when I say weight, I mean that they, you know, I'm trying to create my own kind of, I guess, folk clothing in a way. One of the things that's really important that I haven't touched upon with the kind of garments is I was always, and I think I still am, always really, really envious of people who really know where they're from and have the connection to traditional clothing. And, you know, I think that folk clothing, you know, irrespective of where it's from all over the world, is just really powerful because it's so much more than a jacket, right? It's so much more than a garment. It has culture woven into it. And I think within these mini worlds, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to kind of stitch together meaning and stitch together kind of, I guess, cultural artifacts that belong and exist in this middle space that I'm trying to constantly find an entry point into. You know, it's a space that I think about a lot when I'm working and, you know, trying to understand that diasporic space that I'm constantly chasing after. And so I think the studio is a space where I'm actually able to kind of allow those things to manifest, because oftentimes in the performance, I'm thinking about a lot of logistical things or just, you know, yes, you go into like a different frame of mind, but in the studio, I don't know, I guess it's just all about, it's just a space of experimentation. And sometimes it's nice to be really chaotic and not think in a linear way, which I often have a hard time doing anyways. I'm very sporadic. You can probably tell by the way I'm speaking. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
No, it does. I guess I'm always so fascinated by the kind of contraction of scale. You have this microcosm you're building, you can see the disparate objects, and then somehow there is this translation into a public space, into a live moment where there are bodies wearing garments and they're filling them up.
I think it's because like as a kid, I've just really, really loved movies and I really like theater. And I, you know, I think as a young person probably fantasized about participating in that world. And obviously I don't, but this is my way to kind of try to do that, right? Like try to create your own kind of a cinematic feel within a, you know, physical space. And also just, I think one of the things I never allowed myself to do when I was younger, and especially in art school, I never allowed myself visual pleasure, you know, especially, you know, in the early 2000s when I was studying painting, and like I come from very, you know, Vancouver is amazing, but it was very conceptually like laden kind of education. And it was like, there's like no pleasure in it. Like you cannot like this, like, nope, you know, it just, and so for me now, it's like, that's the most important thing for me, is I want it to feel like there's a bit of whimsy to it. I want to actually enjoy these spaces that I've made, because within the context of the last show, it's really about inviting people in, right? It's not just about like, come into this space and look at all these things that I've made. It's whatever, don't look at them if you don't want, but at least you have this space where you're able to kind of relax, you know. And if, I think people probably saw before, but we made that giant soft sculpture of the orca, you know, whilst of course it's like the physical kind of manifestation of like the grandmother orca in the space that the story is based on, but actually what it is, it's a pillow, you know. I want it to be a cushion. I want people to be able to hang out. I want people to feel like they can sit on it. And I want people to feel like this space is theirs, you know. It's like, I guess, and that's another reason why the video for it was so slow. It's not meant to be consumed right away. You don't even really have to pay attention. You can zone out, you know, just trying to create these spaces where people feel like they're able to lounge around and just be, you know, there's no kind of expectation of them.
That's great.
Even though earlier I was like, people should react and they should have a call and response feel and know what to do. Anyways.
Should we have the question, Ned, if you...
Yeah. Thanks both of you for a really super interesting talk. And my question actually leads on quite nicely from what you were just discussing then, Zadie. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this kind of quite tricky word, like authenticity, and particularly how you see that functions in your work, but also, you know, the different elements of your work. You talked a lot about immersion and the audience kind of knowing their roles or having some kind of semblance of being active. And then also maybe within your performances, could you talk a bit about the sort of structure of your performances in terms of rehearsal and how structured is that process for the performers? Do they know exactly what they're doing, or is there an element of improvisation? And how does that all reflect back on this kind of idea of authenticity, given your work is so laden with kind of references?
Okay, damn, Ned, those are a lot of questions. Okay. Okay. I guess, like, let's say I can answer the first question a little bit. We can weave it throughout. So you mentioned authenticity. I think that's something that I always have, I think as a younger person was really obsessed with, and that's probably from my interest in, I guess, like in hip hop music. A lot of the idea that the storytellers within those things would be telling like real things that happened to them. And usually what happens to musicians who end up saying things that they didn't really do, people all of a sudden, you know, whatever, turn their backs on them or think, oh, you're fake or whatever. And, you know, it's also the same thing when you're working with cultural material. You know, I think there is an expectation that you should have an actual connection to that, because if not, it's just not believable. Having said that, I think within my work, and the thing that becomes really interesting and difficult when you're someone who is, you know, working within the diasporas, is we all like to use this word now, is that it becomes really confusing, it's really slippery, and oftentimes when you're working with references and you're basically appropriating work, which is pretty much all that I do. You know, I'm not someone that knows how to make original images, so I always take source material and I'll manipulate it in a way where it, you know, this 16th century image of a Japanese fox spirit now exists in my painting. I've changed it in order to adapt it to my thing. So, I mean, I guess that would be a thing that could be considered inauthentic, but in a way for me, you know, the source material is really specific and I can give reasons and I can defend my usage of them. You know, I'm not saying those are always would be justified, but that's something that I deeply do think about. So I'm saying all this, but mainly to the point that that's a question I'm constantly thinking about as well, because it's something that I don't really know how to even answer, mainly because I'm so in the middle of it. You know, it's like when you're so in the middle of, you know, a larger kind of cultural idea, it's really difficult to think exactly where you fit and the mistakes that you're making or the things that make sense. Because at the same time with this, I'm trying to kind of forge ahead. It's, you know, it's a long time conversation about like migration or globalization and like hybridity and melting pot cities, you know, whatever. You know, those are, you know, like 30, 40-year-old questions. But
I just had just one thing to add, was something I read yesterday, well, last night, was Victoria Sin said about your work, it's self-mythologizing as a survival tactic, which I thought was really great. This kind of idea that you are consciously playing with authenticity and thinking about a very personal sense of self-mythology in order to forge ahead, as you said, to kind of position yourself and your history in a new direction.
I mean, I love that quote that, you know, Vic said, I think other people have mentioned it to me, and I remember, I think this conversation was one that I had with them a few years ago at the Serpentine, when I did Serpentine Marathon. And, you know, another artist who also employs that idea of self-mythologizing. There's so many artists that are doing that. And I think it's a really exciting and interesting way in which you're able to kind of explore those things, because you're able to kind of fill in the gaps of things you don't know. You know, I mean, I guess I could go on about this and probably not sound completely uncomprehendable, but that's mainly because I'm so much in the mix of it. So I don't really know even how to answer those questions, because, you know, even when I look at myself, I'm really self-critical. I can see things like, if I was outside of me, I'd be like, well, that artist is doing this, or, I have all these other thoughts, but at the same time, I think it's really important not to, for me anyways, self-censor, which I still do, but it's important to kind of be a little bit messy, because you need to understand where the edges are, right? You're trying to like push past that. But, with regards to choreography and the movement and the performances, some things that we have been doing, the 5 performers that I work with, basically come together, and I appointed 2 of them, Yumino Seki and Jayu Korti, to be the kind of lead choreographers, just because they had the most dance experience, and also the way in which they understand dance and how they move, and like the training that they've had within like Asian style dance is something that I really need and I learn from, and so I need their expertise. So oftentimes in the performances, what they'll do is they'll actually do a lot of like dance exercises, suggest movements depending on kind of the story arc or what I'm trying to say, or a conceptual feeling, and then they manifest that in movement, which for me is super interesting, because as someone who uses image and objects to kind of tell a story, which sometimes is not something you can read so easily on the surface, right? It's the same way with dance. Like, if these movements, a lot of the things that they're doing, it's not literal, right? So oftentimes we basically, it's actually a really stressful way of working, but I do think it works. You basically try lots of different exercises, lots of different movements, and then you try to create choreographed sequences. And then you basically, from the end, you just do run-throughs and see what works, But usually it's even like the very last minute, like people change things and stuff. And I'm constantly writing notes because I need to memorize it. Like, even though I'm not doing it, I need to know exactly what happens so that I can also give support if it's needed, but also just for my own peace of mind, so I know exactly what's happening. And things change and shift, and because I'm such a structured, orderly person, like I'm in the corner like freaking out, being like, you missed the step, realizing it's very, it's irrelevant, and actually the thing that they end up doing is the thing that's appropriate, because they're connected to the audience, and they're the ones who are kind of gauging the room. They're the ones feeling the synergy in the space, so they there's a lot of trust, right? So you got to let go, and that's another thing I like about performance. Is someone who is, really obsessively controlling, is you got to let go. Even working with Benito, he'll say to me at times, like, listen, you need to go away. Like, you're giving me the space to do something that I think that would work. So you need to just allow me to do it. And it's like, yeah, you're right, because you're not like some hired artisan that's doing exactly what I'm saying. You need to give people space. And the same thing with the performances. And sometimes things work and sometimes they don't, both sculpturally or in the performances. People do things and I'm like, we're not going to do that again. Like, I didn't like it. Unless there's a good rebuttal, then I might be like, okay, I'm wrong maybe. I think that's the thing that I really like about this. It's like, it's a collective team effort. So there's less emphasis being put on the one person. Like, this is my own kind of ego-driven thing. It's like, got to be exactly how I want it. It's all about me. But it's nice to step aside and, this a collective group of ideas. And that's why I talk about the Harry Potter Museum, as you know. It's amazing to see the collective effort of like thousands of people for one unified goal, right? Where it's like, the main kind of like the apex of whoever the genius is gone. Like, who cares about J.K. Rowling or whoever the directors were? It's like, who cares even about the actors? There's just so many things that are going on. And it's kind of a really egalitarian way in which I think that things are structured in order to make the work really good.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And I just want to try, we've got a few more minutes left, so we can probably have a couple of questions. If anybody's got any, they can send them through using the little Q&A button at the bottom of your screen.
This one, what happens when you talk a lot. So every interview that comes to my studio, basically it's like a tactic. I'm like, I'm just going to say everything so that when it's done, it's just done. And everyone's always like, oh, you covered it all. No questions. I'm like, excellent.
Okay. I mean, if there's no questions from anyone, Amy, do you have anything else you want to add? I think I asked quite a lot of questions in one there. So.
Only because of the fact we're doing this on Zoom and where we are right now. How are you yeah, what are you? What does the rest of the year look like for you? I mean, I saw from Instagram you're painting at the moment. I guess, are you working towards another live work, or do you have you're just continuing to make and think and develop ideas?
Yeah, I have like a new commissioned exhibition coming up. It's going to premiere in Canada and then come to the UK next year in spring. And then I have just other work that I'm working towards.
But what are you reading or watching or listening to, or maybe what do you do? Like, yeah, when you're in between projects, what are you tuning into?
So all my friends know, because I don't not talk about it ever. I'm watching The Last Dance. Well, I finished it, the Michael Jordan documentary.
Oh yeah, you said.
Yeah, it's like, have you watched it, Ned? Yeah,
no, I haven't seen it yet, but I thought you were going to say Drag Race. I thought you were going to.
Yes, I tried staying away from it for a while because I just realized I'm just like, oh, it just takes so much time. It's like this series is sucking my life away because you just can't stop watching. But yes, because of lockdown, I binged like this last season, which now we're waiting for the finale. But yeah, no, I think I'm kind of over Drag Race. It's just too formulaic. Everything is very predictable. I mean, of course, like, the casting is so entertaining and it's so charismatic and so interesting. But yeah, no, that, and then I've been listening to a lot of podcasts. I do actually have a lot of books. I try to read parts of them. I need to kind of also like remind myself, like, just because you own all these books does not mean all the knowledge has like gone into your brain. You actually need to sit down. So one of the things I do is I listen to audiobooks as well. And another thing I've found that I have found to be very helpful with certain books that I'm having a harder time reading is I'll get it on audiobook and then I'll have the actual book and then I'll read along. Because I think for me, listening to audiobooks when they're fiction is really easy in the studio, but obviously if they're kind of academic, you have to really pay attention. So almost to the fact that sometimes like it's better just to read it because then you can pause at your own time and have it. Anyway, so that's very boring. But yes, I've got lots of Netflix, lots of wine.
Surviving, trying to,
I think we've all been drinking lots of wine, haven't we? That's for sure. Thanks so much, both of you, for your time and your honesty and openness. I think it was such a good conversation, and the audience is a bit shy today, but I hope you both enjoyed it as well. And Zadie, could you just tell us, because I know your Delaware Pavilion show has been extended, right? And when's that been extended to? Can you remember?
I think it's a September 21st.
Okay.
12th.
So hopefully things will be open in that time and everyone can go and see your great show that you've got down there. But yeah, once again, thanks a lot for joining us. And yeah, like I said, the next Performance Exchange broadcast is on the 11th of June. So tune in for that one. And yeah, just one more thanks to Zadie and Amy.
Thank you, Ned.
Thank you.
Zadie.
Okay, see you soon, guys. Bye.
Bye.